Have you ever stood in front of something so massive, so impossibly out of place, that your brain refused to believe it was real? If you haven't, you're about to. Imagine you're a German infantryman in the summer of 1941, marching confidently into the Soviet Union, told the enemy is weak, broken, and already collapsing. The road ahead is supposed to be cleared, just another column pushing deeper into Barbarossa. But then you hear it, a low, metallic groan rolling through the fog, the kind that makes the ground feel alive beneath your boots. And as the mist parts, you see it, the KV-2, a tower of steel, taller than any tank you've ever known, its turret the size of a small room, and its cannon staring directly at you. You were told Soviet armor was a joke. Now the joke is staring back, and it's about to fire. The morning of June 22nd, 1941 begins with a cold fog stretched across the forest roads of Lithuania. The light rises slowly through the haze, turning the world into shifting shapes and muted shadows. German soldiers move down the muddy track in steady columns, weapons slung and uniforms damp from the night's humidity. The quiet rhythm of boots striking earth mixes with the faint clatter of engines farther behind. The men expect only light resistance. Reports from the previous hours insist that Soviet units are retreating in confusion. Officers speak confidently about collapsed defensive lines and abandoned checkpoints. The advance feels almost too easy. The column moves past burned-out farmhouses and scattered equipment left on the roadside. A broken field gun lies turned over in a ditch, its wheels still warm. Empty ammunition crates mark where Soviet crews fled in haste. Every sign reinforces the same belief: the enemy is disorganized and unprepared. German mechanics riding with the lead vehicles comment quietly about Soviet tanks. Earlier training had described them as crude machines with slow turrets and poor construction. Some engineers even laughed at Soviet designs during briefings, pointing out how certain turrets looked like they were bolted on as an afterthought. Nothing ahead seems capable of altering that confidence. As the column pushes deeper into the fog, the road narrows between tall pines and thick undergrowth. The silence grows heavier. A few soldiers feel something shift in the air, an uneasiness they cannot explain. The fog thickens suddenly, rolling across the track like smoke. The point squad slows, raising hands for the vehicles to halt. Engines rumble to a softer idle, their sound echoing between the trees. A faint metallic creak drifts through the mist, low and distant, almost like a door opening inside a steel bunker. The men look ahead but see only a wall of white. No movement, no silhouettes, just the soft swirl of morning fog. A half-track commander signals his driver to ease forward a few meters. The vehicle crawls ahead, tires pressing into wet soil. Still nothing becomes clear. The column waits, breaths turning to pale clouds in the cold air. Then the fog shifts ever so slightly. A darker shape begins to form on the road, huge and square, like the outline of a building. At first it seems impossible for such a shape to stand in the middle of a forest road. But as the mist thins, the shape becomes sharper to symmetrical to rigid, to metallic to be anything natural. A whisper travels down the line. Some believe it is a truck. Others think it is a pillbox dragged into position overnight. Another few seconds pass, and the truth becomes undeniable. The shape is a tank, an enormous, towering machine unlike anything the men have seen. Its hull rises higher than a man's head, and its turret stands even taller, like a small armored house mounted on tracks. The front plate is thick and flat, scarred by old impacts. Beneath the turret sits a massive gun barrel, wide enough to swallow a man's fist. It is not pointed at the Germans, not yet, but its presence feels like a weight pressing down on the entire road. The soldiers freeze, unsure if the tank is abandoned or manned. The machine does not move. No engine sound comes from inside its armored belly. It simply stands there, blocking the road like a silent iron wall. Some privates exchange nervous looks. A few officers try to identify the model, but fail. None had seen the silhouette during training. Something about the height and bulk seems unreal. The KV-2, though unknown to most of the Germans here, waits with quiet patience for a moment. A strange hope spreads that the tank is broken down or out of fuel. A reconnaissance NCO pushes forward with a small team, trying to approach under the cover of fog. Every step feels louder than it should. The forest seems to hold its breath. The KV-2 remains motionless, its huge turret staring forward without expression. German engineers whisper about turret jams and poor craftsmanship, repeating what they were told in briefings. The sight of this tank still unsettles them, but old assumptions offer a thin shield of comfort. A half-track edges closer. The driver's face tightens as he leans out, squinting through the mist. The tank still does not react. For a heartbeat, it appears lifeless. An officer waves forward, believing the machine is abandoned and left behind during a panicked Soviet retreat. A few soldiers even chuckle quietly at its ungainly shape. The tall turret looks awkward and heavy, almost comically oversized. Someone mutters that Soviet engineers must have attached it without understanding balance. A nervous laugh runs through the squad. Then the sound returns. A slow grinding hum awakens from inside the steel tower. The KV-2 stirs like a sleeping giant forced from slumber. The enormous turret begins to rotate with a deep mechanical groan. It does not move quickly. It turns with steady, deliberate force, as if each degree demands the strength of the entire machine. Fog slips around the massive silhouette as the gun swings toward the road, its muzzle widening like the mouth of a cannon fortress. The laughter dies instantly. Every German on the road feels the shift. The tank is not abandoned. It is not disabled. It is not harmless. It is alive and aware of them. The KV-2's 150mm gun completes its arc and stops, pointed directly at the center of the column. A heavy silence falls, broken only by the ticking of cooling engines and the faint drip of dew from pine branches. Fear crawls through the ranks. The men grip their rifles tighter. The half-dragged driver freezes in place, unable to move. The monster has finished turning, and it is ready to fire. The turret of the KV-2 settles into position, its enormous gun staring down the narrow forest road like a watchful eye. The fog drifts around the heavy barrel, making it appear even larger, as if the weapon stretches out of another world. For a moment, nothing moves. The German column waits in stunned silence, unable to believe what stands before them. The half-track closest to the giant trembles slightly under its idling engine. Men inside stare upward through the vision slots, their breath tight in their chest. The tension builds until it becomes almost painful. A junior officer steps forward and signals for the nearest anti-tank rifle team. The two soldiers hurry into position, dropping behind a small ridge of earth. Their weapon is set, aimed at the KV-2's hull. Sweat gathers on their foreheads despite the morning cold. They receive a whispered command and pull the trigger. A sharp crack echoes through the trees, followed by the smack of metal against metal. The round bounces harmlessly off the KV-2's front plate, leaving only a faint mark. The tank does not react. Its silence feels heavier than the impact another anti-tank rifle fires. Another useless ricochet. The German soldiers realize quickly that their light weapons cannot harm the Iron Giant. Officers call for a PaK-37 anti-tank gun to be brought forward. Crews push the small cannon through the mud, struggling with its weight on the uneven ground. When the gun finally reaches the front of the line, the crew sets it in place and loads an armor-piercing round. Their hands move with practiced speed, even though nervous tension shakes their fingers. The PaK gun fires. The boom rolls across the forest, scattering birds into the air. Smoke erupts from the small cannon's muzzle. The round strikes the KV-2's frontal armor with a loud clang, but again it does nothing. The shell shatters on impact. A quiet murmur flows through the German ranks, a mixture of disbelief and unease. A second round is loaded. The gun fires again. Another flash, another clang, another failure. The KV-2 remains motionless, unmoved, untouched for a brief second. Hope flickers that perhaps the Soviet crew inside cannot hear them, or has abandoned the tank entirely. The fog thickens once more, softening the edges of the machine and giving it an almost ghostly shape. But then a deep rumble begins from within the KV-2's hull. The sound vibrates through the mud and into the boots of every soldier on the road. The giant is waking. Inside the tank, the Soviet crew works quickly. Sweat drips down their faces as they prepare the massive 152mm shell. The loader braces himself, using both arms to shove the heavy round into the breech. The gunner adjusts his sights, fighting with the slow-moving optics. The commander keeps his eye at the periscope, watching the blurred shapes of the German vehicles through the fog. The KV-2 is far from perfect. Its turret is slow, its visibility is limited, and the loading process demands strength and teamwork. But once prepared, its shot carries the force of an artillery battery. The final mechanical clank inside the turret signals the gun is ready. Outside, German soldiers feel the road shake under their feet. Someone shouts for cover. Others dive toward the ditches on either side. The half-track in front tries to reverse but slips in the mud, its tires spinning helplessly. Officers yell commands, but their voices drown in the tense rumble of the KV-2's engine and the growing whine of the elevation gear. The cannon fires. The blast is enormous. A pressure wave slams into the forest, shaking branches and throwing loose dirt into the air. The sound rolls through the trees like thunder. The fog lights up with fire for a split second, turning the entire road into a pulsing flash of orange. The recoil shudders through the KV-2, sinking its tracks deeper into the earth. The shell travels only a short distance before striking the first German half-track. The vehicle disappears in a burst of metal fragments and flames. Shards rip through the soldiers nearby, sending men tumbling into the mud. The blast wave knocks helmets from heads and stuns entire groups of infantry. Smoke rises quickly, dark and oily, spreading across the road in thick coils. The shock from the explosion spreads through the column. Soldiers scramble for cover, hiding behind trees and ditch walls. Another half-track tries to reposition, but crashes into a ditch while avoiding debris. The pack crew attempts to reload, but their hands shake violently to steady the shell. Fear grows with every passing second. The KV-2's turret groans again as it begins its slow rotation toward the next target. Each degree of movement feels deliberate and unstoppable. Men lying in the mud watch the giant swing toward them with wide, horrified eyes. Some try to run deeper into the forest. Others remain frozen, unsure where safety exists. Another shell is loaded inside the KV-2. The loader grits his teeth, knowing that each shot requires strength and timing. The commander calls out the next target. The gunner adjusts his aim carefully. The tank's enormous barrel lowers slightly, lining up with a cluster of German vehicles trapped on the road. The second blast shakes the ground again. The shell strikes a parked truck loaded with ammunition. A towering fireball erupts, sending a shockwave down the road. Burning crates and metal fragments scatter into the trees. Soldiers nearby are thrown from their positions. Flames crackle and spread along spilled fuel. Panic begins to take hold. German officers attempt to reorganize their men, shouting to bring more guns forward. But the narrow road, the thick fog, and the burning wreckage make movement nearly impossible. Every attempt to advance feels like crawling into the jaws of a fortress. The KV-2 continues its slow, relentless firing rhythm. Each shot crushes another attempt to stabilize the situation. The once confident German column now lies pinned, stunned, and struggling to understand how a single Soviet tank has turned their advance into chaos. And the battle has only begun. Smoke from the first explosions drifts across the forest road, mixing with the fog until both blend into a thick, shifting curtain. The air smells of burning fuel and splintered wood. German soldiers crouch behind trees and ditches, trying to understand how a single tank has halted an entire motorized regiment. On the first day of the invasion, the crackle of flames joins the distant rumble of engines, still idling far behind the blocked roadway. The chaos that followed the KV-2's first shot leaves the men shaken and silent. The KV-2 stands firm at the center of the devastation. Its thick armor is blackened by smoke but untouched by enemy fire. Burning half-tracks lie scattered across the road in front of it. Ammunition trucks flicker with small fires that threaten to erupt again at any moment. The Soviet giant appears more like a bunker planted in the earth than a vehicle capable of movement. Every soldier who looks at it feels the same sense of dread. The tank is not simply holding a position. It is controlling the entire battlefield. German officers gather behind a shallow rise a short distance from the front. Their faces are tense as they study maps and speak in hurried whispers. The plan must change. The narrow forest road gives little room to maneuver. Vehicles trapped in the rear cannot advance, and those closer to the front cannot retreat without exposing themselves to the KV-2's massive gun. Reports from scouts insist there is no alternate route for several kilometers. The column is stuck, and the enemy is taking advantage of every second. Orders spread through the ranks for a flanking attempt. Infantry squads move into the woods on either side of the road, hoping to circle around the tank and strike from an angle. The forest floor is soft and uneven, covered in fallen branches and thick undergrowth. Progress is slow. Soldiers struggle to stay quiet as they weave between the pine trunks, their boots sinking into damp soil. The fog continues to cling to the forest, reducing visibility and muffling sound. As the infantry units close in, the KV-2's turret begins to rotate again. The groaning metal echoes through the trees, alerting the soldiers even before the giant turns toward them. The gun does not need to fire to create fear. Its slow, deliberate motion alone forces the advancing infantry to drop and take cover. The tank's commander cannot see far into the woods, but he understands the German tactics well enough. Any movement along the flanks is a threat. The turret continues sweeping until it faces the tree line. The Soviet loader works with all his strength to prepare the next shell. Each round weighs more than most artillery shells normally carried by infantry units. Sweat rolls down his arms despite the cool morning air. The interior of the tank is cramped and shaking lightly with each step of the crew. The gunner finds his angle, and the commander gives the signal. The KV-2 fires again. The blast punches through the forest, sending birds flying from the treetops. The shell hits the ground just inside the tree line, creating a crater and scattering debris over the flanking squads. Shouts rise from the German infantry as they pull back to regroup. The KV-2 has not struck them directly, but the near hit is enough to break the attempt. The dense forest does not offer enough cover against a shell of that size. Any closer, and the entire squad would have been torn apart. Officers order the men to fall back to the road and search for another solution. A second anti-tank gun is brought forward under cover of smoke. Its crew drags the weapon through muddy ditches and positions it behind a fallen tree. They load an armor-piercing shell and aim carefully at the KV-2's tracks, hoping that disabling the tank's movement will help. The small cannon fires. Smoke bursts from the barrel. The shell strikes low, chipping only a fragment of metal from the thick track links. The KV-2 does not even shift from the hit. The anti-tank crew attempts another shot, but the KV-2's turret turns toward them. The gunner inside the Soviet tank adjusts his aim. The massive barrel lowers slightly. The German crew scrambles to reload, aware that they are in the direct line of fire. The KV-2 fires. The blast sweeps across the clearing. The shell lands near the anti-tank gun and sends the entire position into a storm of dirt and smoke. When the air clears, the cannon lies overturned and silent. Hours pass as German units attempt different strategies. Mortar teams fire round after round toward the tank's position, but the heavy armor shrugs off the impacts. Small explosions burst around the KV-2 without leaving visible damage. Rifle and machine gun fire only patters harmlessly against its thick plates. Engineers consider approaching with charges, but the open stretch of road leading to the tank makes such a run nearly impossible. Every time a movement is spotted, the KV-2's turret turns with slow, overwhelming presence. Inside the Soviet tank, the crew feels the strain of the prolonged fight. The heavy shells are nearly exhausting to load. The turret's rotation is slow and demanding. The fumes inside the fighting compartment grow thicker, forcing the men to breathe through cloth and work with burning eyes. Sweat runs down their backs. The temperature rises despite the cold day outside, but the crew continues with determination. Each time they look through the periscope and see the halted German column, they understand the importance of holding the road. By mid-afternoon, the battlefield changes. Smoke from destroyed vehicles mixes with the fog to create a dark haze. That limits sight even further. German troops remain pinned behind cover, their confidence shaken. Their early expectations of light resistance have vanished completely. Officers continue discussing new plans, but morale has shifted. The KV-2 is no longer viewed as an obstacle. It is viewed as an immovable fortress. The hours of stalemate wear down both sides. The Germans understand that as long as the giant remains intact, the entire advance is frozen. The Soviets inside the tank know that their strength and ammunition cannot remain endless. Each passing minute brings new pressure. The forest road becomes a battlefield defined by a single machine, and the Germans are preparing something different for the next attempt. The long afternoon settles over the forest road with a heavy stillness. Smoke hangs above the ruined vehicles like a low ceiling, and the fog returns in thin waves, drifting between the blackened trunks of pine trees. German soldiers wait behind cover, listening to the distant crack of fires and the groaning metal of cooling engines. Every attempt to break the KV-2's hold has ended in failure. The giant stands unshaken at the center of the devastation, its turret occasionally turning with slow, deliberate motion. The men understand now that rushing the tank or trying to flank it blindly is useless. Its armor is too thick, its gun too powerful, and the narrow terrain too restrictive. As officers regroup and discuss new options, the sound of engines emerges from deeper in the forest. It is stronger and steadier than before. The vibration travels through the ground, and soon the silhouettes of several armored vehicles appear through the haze. Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks roll into view, their turrets moving cautiously as they approach the front. The infantry watches them with a mixture of hope and doubt. Lighter weapons have done nothing to the KV-2, but perhaps the German tanks can succeed where the rest have failed. The Panzer crews halt just behind the wrecked half-tracks, studying the giant blocking the road. Even from a distance, the KV-2's profile feels unnatural. The high turret and broad, flat armor make it appear more like a fortress than a machine. The German tank commanders speak through open hatches, planning a coordinated maneuver. They know the KV-2's weaknesses: slow turret traverse, limited visibility, and a lengthy reload time for its massive gun. If they can move quickly enough, they might be able to strike the Soviet tank before it brings its enormous cannon to bear. Orders spread quickly. To Panzer II's move to the right side of the road, aiming to circle through the forest and hit the KV-2 from an angle. A Panzer IV remains on the road, preparing to fire from long range. Infantry squads follow alongside, hoping to support the tanks by distracting the KV-2 and forcing it to split its attention. The German plan relies on speed. If the KV-2 cannot track multiple threats at once, its armor might not save it. The 1st Panzer IV fires a shell down the road. The round streaks through the fog and strikes the KV-2's frontal armor with a loud metallic crack. Smoke bursts from the point of impact, but the shell fails to penetrate. The Panzer IV reloads and fires again. Another sharp impact, another spark of steel. The KV-2 remains motionless for a moment, as if weighing its response. Inside the Soviet tank, the commander scans through the narrow periscope. The view is limited and distorted by smoke, but he identifies the flash of enemy fire. He orders the turret to turn. The gear grinds loudly as the giant steel structure slowly shifts toward the location of the German tank. The crew knows the risks of rotating the turret. It takes time and exposes them to flanking attacks, but they have no choice. The enemy tanks must be dealt with one at a time. The turret completes its arc with deliberate weight. The KV-2 fires. The shock of the blast rolls down the road, and the shell crashes near the Panzer IV, throwing dirt and fragments across its hull. The German tank quickly reverses, its tracks churning mud as it attempts to reposition. A second shell will hit if it stays still. The Panzer IV moves behind the cover of wreckage, trying to break the KV-2's line of sight. While the giant turret focuses forward, the flanking Panzer IIs emerge from the tree line on the right side. Their engines roar as they push through undergrowth and fallen branches. They fire as soon as they have a clear angle. Their shells strike the KV-2's side armor with sharp, ringing blows. Sparks fly from the thick steel, but neither round penetrates. The Soviet tank shudders from the impacts but holds firm. Its armor was built for situations exactly like this, and the Panzer III's 50mm gun struggles against it. The Soviet crew reacts quickly to the new threat. The commander shouts for the turret to shift, but the massive structure moves painfully slowly. The gunner tries to align the sights, fighting both limited visibility and the tight confines of the turret. The loader, exhausted from hours of lifting heavy ammunition, braces himself for yet another demanding reload. Outside, the Panzer IIs use their mobility to advantage. They fire, reposition, and fire again, trying to find a weak point. Infantry squads support them from the tree line, firing rifles and machine guns to distract the KV-2's crew. Engineers move closer with satchel charges, crawling through the underbrush with cautious, measured movements. Each meter forward takes enormous effort. The KV-2's presence makes every sound feel dangerously loud. The KV-2 attempts to respond. Its turret turns slowly toward the flanking tanks. The German commanders notice the movement and order their crews to spread out. The Panzer IIs separate, forcing the KV-2 to choose only one target. The Soviet gunner struggles to keep the moving tanks in sight. The giant cannon finally lines up on the closest vehicle, but the Panzer IIs break away again, leaving the KV-2 aiming an empty fog. Inside the tank, the Soviet crew begins to feel the strain of the day. The turret's rotation mechanism grows hot from continuous use. The loader's arms ache, and each shell feels heavier. The fumes inside the fighting compartment thicken, making every breath sharp and uncomfortable. Still, the crew pushes on. They know the road behind them must remain closed as long as possible, despite the KV-2's strength. The German pressure begins to show results. The slow turret cannot keep up with the rapid movements of multiple tanks. The Panzer crews coordinate their fire, striking the KV-2's armor again and again. Each hit chips away at the outer edges, though the main plates remain intact. Engineers creep closer along the forest floor, inching toward the possibility of planting charges beneath the giant. The battlefield shifts into a tense contest of endurance. The KV-2's raw power has held the road all day, but the Germans have finally found a way to challenge it, not through a single decisive strike, but through constant pressure and coordinated movement. The Iron Giant continues to fight, but the enemy is learning, adapting, and preparing for something more dangerous. The stalemate is ending, and the next attack will decide whether the fortress can hold. Evening settles over the forest with a dull, heavy light. The sun sinks behind the treetops, turning the smoke-filled air into a mix of dim orange and drifting shadow. The battlefield grows quieter for a moment, as if both sides are catching their breath after the long afternoon. The KV-2 stands in the center of the road, scarred by soot and dust, its tracks sunk deep into the mud. Flames flicker across the broken German vehicles surrounding it, giving the giant tank a faint, uneven glow. Too many soldiers watching from cover. The machine looks less like a vehicle and more like a monument that refuses to fall. The Panzer III and Panzer IV crews remain hidden behind the wreckage, planning their next move. Their earlier attacks did not penetrate the KV-2's armor, but they have learned how to force it into slower, less certain reactions. Its turret rotation has grown weaker, its firing rhythm slower, and the smoke rising faintly from its exhaust hints at strain inside. German officers study the battlefield and conclude that the giant must be close to exhaustion. If they keep pressure on all sides, the crew inside will eventually reach its limit. Engineers prepare explosives behind the tree line. They examine satchel charges, test fuses, and plan their approach. Each man understands the risks. To plant charges under a tank like the KV-2, they must cross open ground littered with debris, all while hoping the turret does not swing toward them. The earlier blast made the approach nearly impossible, but the growing darkness offers a small advantage. Shadows stretch long across the road, and visibility drops with each passing minute. Inside the KV-2, The Soviet crew fights against fatigue. Sweat coats their faces and drips onto the steel floor. The loader's arms tremble each time he lifts another heavy shell. The gunner blinks rapidly, trying to clear the sting of fumes from his eyes. The commander listens through the hole for engine noise and movement, trying to anticipate where the Germans will strike next. The giant tank still functions, but its strength is fading. The turret mechanism creaks louder than before, and each adjustment feels slower than the last. Ammunition stocks have also shrunk. The crew counts the remaining shells and knows that nightfall will not bring rest. The panzer fires again from a distant angle. The shell slams into the KV-2's side, scraping away a chunk of steel, but failing to break through. The giant shudders slightly, but the armor holds. The Soviet crew reacts quickly. The loader forces another shell into the breach while the turret groans. Through another slow rotation, the giant cannon fires. The shot is inaccurate, landing short and sending dirt into the air near the German tank. The panzer retreats at once, disappearing into the darkened haze. The failed hit reveals the KV-2's growing weakness. Its accuracy suffers from the constant rotation, the damaged optics, and the exhaustion of the crew. Each shot now carries uncertainty. The Germans sense this and move in closer. The Panzer III units advance in short bursts, using the wrecks as shifting cover. Their guns fire repeatedly, striking the KV-2's turret ring and its thick side plates. Each impact leaves marks, dents, and small fractures along the edges. The Soviet crew hears the constant hammering and understands what it means. The enemy is trying to disable the turret entirely. Another shell hits the turret ring. A grinding snap echoes inside the KV-2. The turret jerks violently and stops halfway through its rotation. The gunner attempts to shift it, but the mechanism refuses to move. The commander tests it again. Nothing. The turret is jammed. The KV-2 can still fire straight ahead, but anything outside that narrow line is beyond reach. The crew feels the full weight of this new limitation. Outside, the Germans notice the turret freeze. The panzer commanders signal immediately for their crews to spread out. With the KV-2 unable to track multiple directions, they can maneuver more freely. The infantry and engineers move into position, crawling through the deepening shadow. Every step is slow and cautious. The Germans know the KV-2 can still fire, and even a single shell from its massive cannon is enough to destroy any group on the road. The Soviet crew loads another round. They fire down the road toward the faint movement they detect. The blast shakes the air again, lighting the smoke with a bright flash. But the shell strikes only a shattered half-track, splitting it apart in a burst of sparks. The loader reaches for another round, but his hands tremble from exhaustion. German engineers finally make their move. Under the cover of darkness, they crawl forward from the right side. Inching closer with satchel charges held tight, the KV-2 fires again, the muzzle flash revealing the creeping figures for a brief instant. The engineers freeze, heartbeats racing, waiting for the turret to swing. But the turret cannot move. The KV-2 remains fixed in place, unaware of the danger approaching from the side. The engineers continue forward. They reach the tracks. The steel plates rise above them like a wall. They plant the first explosive, press it firmly against the hull, and retreat quickly into the ditch. A muffled blast follows, shaking the earth beneath the tank. Dust and debris fall from the KV-2's side. The explosion is powerful, but the armor holds. The engineers prepare another charge. Inside the tank, the Soviet crew hears the muffled detonation. They sense the danger but cannot respond. The commander shouts for the driver to reposition, but the KV-2 is mired deep in the mud. The heavy tracks groan but fail to lift the giant free. The next blast lands closer, rattling the interior and knocking loose fragments from the turret walls. The Panzer III units move in even tighter, firing at near point-blank range. Their shells hammer against the KV-2's armor. Some wedge into cracks around the turret ring. Others chip away at weakened steel. The tank's hull shakes violently. Flames flicker along the edges of the armor where sparks fall onto spilled fuel. The KV-2 fires once more, one final thunderous shot that disappears into the fog. The blast fades into the dark forest. The Soviet crew prepares for another round. But the ammunition rack is nearly empty. The loader hesitates, knowing that time has run out. The Germans close in from all sides now, their shadows moving through the burnt smoke like silent hunters. The giant has not fallen yet, but the end is only moments away. Night settles fully over the forest, and the battlefield becomes a dim shape of burnt silhouettes and glowing embers. The pale moonlight filters through drifting smoke, casting thin beams across the broken road. The KV-2 stands in the center like a dark tower, its massive hull rising above the shattered wreck surrounding it. The flames from destroyed vehicles flicker against its armor plates, giving the steel a faint, uneven shimmer. The giant no longer moves. Its turret remains stuck in its final position, and no rumble comes from its engine. The German soldiers watching from the tree line sense that the end has come. Yet none step forward immediately. Hours of fighting have taught caution. The engineers prepare one last charge. The earlier explosions weakened the KV-2's lower armor but did not break it. The German officers understand that the tank must be silenced before dawn, or the entire advance will remain frozen in place. The engineers pack the charge carefully, making sure the fuse is secure. Their hands tremble slightly from exhaustion, adrenaline, and the weight of what they are about to attempt. When the charge is ready, a small team crawls across the debris-filled road, moving slowly beneath the thin veil of smoke. Inside the KV-2, the Soviet crew works in near darkness. The small interior lamps flicker from damage and overheating. The air is thick with fumes, dust, and the metallic scent of burned insulation. The loader rests with his back against the steel wall, his arms shaking from hours of lifting heavy shells. The gunner wipes sweat from his face with trembling hands. The commander peers through a cracked periscope lens, but the view outside is nothing but a smear of smoke and shifting shadows. Ammunition is nearly gone. Only a few shells remain, and the crew knows they cannot reload quickly enough to match the German pressure. A loud metallic groan reverberates through the hull as the KV-2 tries once more to shift its turret. The jammed ring does not move. The crew feels the vibration fade away. They understand that their giant now faces the battlefield with a single, fixed line of fire. The driver attempts to rev the engine, but the machine only sputters. Mud, debris, and earlier damage have locked the tank into the earth. The KV-2 is still a fortress, but it can no longer move or turn. Outside, the engineers reach the tank. They work quietly, placing the final charge beneath the exposed section of the hull. The steel surface towers over them, dark and silent. The engineers exchange brief nods and crawl backward into the ditch. The fuse is lit. A faint hiss follows as the flame crawls toward the explosive. The men brace themselves for the impact. The blast erupts beneath the KV-2, sending dirt and sparks high into the air. The hull shakes violently. A deep echo rolls through the forest. Smoke bursts from the underside of the tank. The giant remains standing, but the explosion has torn open a section near the lower plates. Flames flicker briefly inside the damage. For the first time since morning, the KV-2 looks wounded. German tanks move forward cautiously. The Panzer III crews fire at close range, striking the weakened area with a series of sharp, echoing impacts. The shells hammer the same section again and again. The KV-2's armor finally gives way. A deep crack spreads across the damaged plates, followed by a burst of smoke and sparks from within. The giant shudders once more, then falls still. Inside the Soviet tank, the crew braces as smoke floods the compartment. The commander calls for the hatch to be opened, but the blast has twisted the metal. The gunner tries to force it, pushing with all his remaining strength, but the hatch refuses to move. Flames begin to lick at the lower interior. The crew's movements slow as heat and smoke thicken the air. They fought for hours without breaking, and now they face the end together inside the steel walls that protected them all day. Outside, German soldiers wait for any sign of movement. None appears. Slowly, carefully, they approach the KV-2. The flames around the battlefield cast long shadows across the tank sides. The engineers circle the hull, checking for danger. When they climb onto the turret and force the hatch open, they find the interior still hot with lingering smoke. The crew inside lies silent. The KV-2 has fought to its last breath. A strange quiet settles over the road. German soldiers stand among the ruins, staring at the massive tank. It is larger than they imagined. Many touch the armor with their hands, feeling the thickness of the steel. Others study the dents and scars covering its sides. There is no laughter now, no comments about clumsy Soviet engineering. The KV-2, once mocked in training halls, has halted their entire regiment for nearly a full day. The cost of passing this single obstacle lies scattered all around them: burning trucks, overturned guns, and the bodies of men who tried and failed to move it. Officers mark the time in their reports. The road is finally open, but the delay is severe. Entire formations behind them have been forced to slow their advance. Schedules for the opening days of Operation Barbarossa have been disrupted. Commanders far from this forest road will later wonder why progress stalled on what should have been an easy sector. Those who stood here know the answer. As dawn approaches, a pale blue light stretches across the forest. Smoke rises gently above the tank wrecks, drifting into the morning sky. The KV-2 remains in the center of the road, blackened and still. Its enormous turret angled toward the distant hills as if guarding them even in defeat. The German soldiers who pass by look up at the quiet giant with a mixture of fear, respect, and disbelief. The road is open again, but the memory of the steel titan remains.